Just summarize what you see some of the positives Portland has going for it. What advice would you give commercial brokers just getting into the business? For the next 10 to 20 years, what do you see happening to commercial real estate here in Maine? We'd like to welcome our listeners to the Boulos Beat podcast. I'm your host, Greg Boulos. The Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate services firm with offices in Portland, Maine and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We've been selling and leasing real estate in Maine and New Hampshire since 1975. This is a series providing insight into Maine's real estate movers and shakers. Our special guest today on the Boulos Beat is Vin Veroneau. Vin grew up in Portland, attended Cheverus High School, then went on to the University of San Francisco to earn a BS degree. From there, he earned an MBA degree from the University of Southern Maine. Later in life, while running J.B. Brown & Sons, Vin obtained his JD degree from the University of Maine School of Law. Currently, Vin serves as a director of both Bangor Savings Bank and DBH Management, Inc., and is a trustee at the Waynflete School in Portland. On a personal note, Vin is one of 10 siblings and has been married to his wife Nancy for 32 years. Vin is a father to 8 children, who go by the names of Andrew, Margaret, Joe, Catherine, Martha, Ann, John, and Mike. He also has a grandson whose name is Niall. All the kids attended Waynflete, which is a private pre-K school up on the West End. In addition, 7 of them went to Boston College. His son Mike, who is 17 and in high school, may go there but has not yet decided. The kids are all known to be great athletes. On the professional side, Vin joined J.B. Brown as president and CEO in January 2005 and is involved in all phases of commercial real estate development and asset management. Prior to joining the company, Vin was a partner at North Atlantic Commercial Brokers in Portland and a commercial leasing manager with Northland Development Corporation. Vin's been in the commercial real estate business since 1987. Welcome, Vin.
Wow, I feel old.
Vin, I understand you're 56 years old. Speaking of old, that's not. But you look like you're 40. And I just wonder, how is that possible after raising 8 kids?
Well, Nancy did most of the raising, and so I really have to give her a huge amount of credit for both the success of our family and the success that I've had with J.B. Brown.
It's almost Christmas. We're taping this in December, and I just watched Home Alone, which I tend to do every year. And as you may recall, in the beginning of that movie, there's a scene where the parents end up leaving one of the kids home while the rest of the family flies off to Paris. Has something like that ever happened to you and Nancy with 8 kids?
It happens. We actually joke with one of our daughters, Anne, that she's the forgotten one. My phone rang one time. I think she was in 7th grade. It was a Waynflete lacrosse game. It was her game. We're driving down Congress Street, and the phone rings, and I said, I'll answer it. I don't recognize the number. And it was Ann. She said, "Where are you?" She goes, "You forgot me. It was my game." So, yeah, it's been more than one occasion that we've sort of left someone behind for sure.
Did she call DHS on you? Or
No. They're much smart. They're very smart kids,
right. Yeah. You are president and CEO of J.B. Brown & Sons. John Bundy Brown founded the company in 1828 as a sugar manufacturer, food retailer, and hotel owner. With substantial land holdings and properties in all sectors of Portland real estate market, J.B. Brown eventually developed much of Congress Street, the waterfront, and the West End. Vin, can you give us a history of J.B. Brown and some of the properties the company has developed over the years before you got involved?
Yeah, I think the most iconic building in Portland that the company built is the J.B. Brown block, which is across from what some of us still remember as Porteous and now is the Maine College of Art. And that was built in, I believe, 1881. But J.B. Brown had a fairly heavy hand in developing a fair amount of Congress Street from Monument Square up to Congress Square, including the Lancaster block.
And he made his money, as I said earlier, in the molasses business.
He shipped molasses from the Caribbean to Portland and made brown sugar. And so he had quite a large facility, employed up to 1,000 people in the 1800s. It was a 10-story building where currently the company owns the courtyard by Marriott.
He must have been the man back then.
I think there was, I think it's been written that he paid 30% of the real estate taxes in the city of Portland.
Actually, I did a little research, and my understanding is that one time J.B. Brown owned 30% of the taxable property in Portland, from Congress Street to Monument Square, then to the waterfront in the West End. That's a lot.
It's a lot. There are very few title searches that are done on the peninsula that J.B. Brown does not show up at some point in that ownership.
And so that whole West End of Portland, West End of the peninsula, where all the brick homes are, the beautiful homes, wasn't that all part of his estate at one time?
It was. The Bram Hall mansion that he built was where the West End cemetery is located. Bowden Street, Carroll Street was all one property.
Amazing. What was the first building you purchased or developed for J.B. Brown?
I think the first project that I developed was the Key Bank and Starbucks in Falmouth, actually. Took a group of sort of what I would consider non-strategic assets that the company owned, sold them, and tax deferred them into this new development.
1031 exchange?
Yes, 1031 exchange.
And so did you have those tenants lined up before you built that, or did you build it on spec? Or?
No, we purchased the land from Key Bank. So Key Bank we knew was a tenant, and I previously represented Starbucks Coffee when I was with North Atlantic Commercial Brokers, and so we knew Starbucks was always interested in that site.
Did you put Starbucks on the corner of Exchange and Middle Street?
Yeah, it was the first Starbucks in Maine.
I don't know if you remember this, but once as soon as they opened, somebody broke their windows because they were a national franchise, and they didn't want to see that in the Old Port.
Yeah.
That's going back a while. Then when you consider purchasing or developing a piece of property, what do you look for that tells you, yeah, this is going to be a good investment?
Well, I think the adage of you make money when you buy is a truism that you can't avoid. And so we look at something that we think makes a reasonable return day one, but also has upside and can weather a downturn in the marketplace. A lot of that comes down to location.
Since you've been president and CEO of J.B. Brown & Sons, you've acquired and developed a number of properties. To name a few, J.B. Brown repurchased land on West Commercial Street previously sold by J.B. Brown in 1879.
Yes.
And it was sold to the railroad, and then you bought it back from the railroad. What was the story behind that?
So we own on West Commercial Street the Gray Bar building and what is also known as a Star Match building, the multicolored buildings. When I first started, the railroad owned the land around the Star Match building, but the company had been using it for parking without really much permission or any permission, to tell you the truth, and had paved the property. So I had reached out and built some rapport with the Roland Theriault, who was the real estate person at the time, and ended up buying that land to protect our asset. And through that, we built some rapport, and I kept asking them if they would sell the balance of the site, which is 10.5 acres, which they did in 2011. And so again, I knew the company had owned it, but I didn't know it took us 131 years to reacquire title.
And how long did it take you to work with the railroad to acquire it again? I mean, it's usually they're pretty slow in letting things go.
Yeah, so I quickly started a relationship with the railroad in 2005 when I started at J.B. Brown, and we purchased the land behind the Star Match building in 2007, I believe, 2008, and then the additional 10.5 acres in 2011. So a long period of time for some people, but a short period of time in the life of J.B. Brown & Sons.
You also developed the 132-room Courtyard by Marriott on Commercial Street. And can you tell us a little bit about that development?
Yeah, so again, that is the property where J.B. Brown had the sugar house. Um, American Can was there for a long time, but those buildings were taken down in Seal Test Ice Cream in 1987. And so it was a gravel parking lot from 1987 until we built the courtyard in 2014. Um, and it's the oldest piece of land the company has continuously owned. I've owned it since 1845. And so a buddy of mine that I run with every day, Mark Dugas, who is a very probably one of the best real estate developers in the hotel space. We continue to talk about where we might put limited surface hotel in Portland, and that site kept coming to the surface.
And I think the way you structured that deal, if you look at the building today, there are condominiums on the top floor, and the first floor is home to is it Tika, the restaurant?
Yeah, Tika.
But I'm assuming to help finance the package, you sold off the condos on the top floor, and as well as the retail, and kept the core, which is what's the strategy behind all that?
The strategy was originally we were going to do a 185-room hotel, and it only took half the block. And it just, from a urban planning standpoint, it just didn't feel right to me to sort of split the block, especially with the Baxter building beside it. And so we looked at, could we fill the box, that would fill the entire length of the block from Maple Street to the Foundry Lane. And so we increased the size of the hotel to 132 rooms. We ended up with 7,000 square feet of retail. And then we had the height to do another floor, and we didn't want to add another floor of rooms, so we added a floor of residential. Originally, I was going to keep them as apartments, but because we weren't renting any apartments at that point in time, 14 units seemed like sort of a small amount to get back into another line of business. So we ended up selling them. So it necessarily wasn't done to capitalize the transaction. It was a result of more of a planning exercise.
So there's a development that you recently completed at the corner of York and High Street in Portland, and El Rayo, which was a well-known or is a well-known Mexican restaurant, was located there. What's the story behind that development that you did on that site?
Yeah, so that's an interesting site. J.B. Brown owned a fair amount of property in that Danforth Street area between Danforth and York Street, but did not own the corner of High and York Street. And so when the Harborview gas station closed, I reached out to Allied or Alliance Energy, excuse me, to buy that. And so we were in the process of buying it, and Nathan Zanton, who is a great workforce housing developer in Portland, came into the picture in the 11th hour. And it was an important parcel for J.B. Brown because it was sort of the gateway to land we owned behind it. And so we had enough land in that area that we sold to Nathan and to Bobby Monks, where they ultimately built, I think it's 53 Danforth Street, a workforce housing project. Right. And so we were able to cobble that building together. The Mazoian had a building where Portland Builders was located, and anyone with any history in Portland, Table Talk Pies was in the front little building.
That's right.
So we purchased that, 2 small houses, and cobbled together a fairly large piece of property in the peninsula, and then developed a building with 63 residential units, about 15,000 square feet of retail space or office space, and then 2 floors of parking for about 211 spaces. Within that parking structure, we also put in the infrastructure and the footings to add another 70 units above that from the Danforth Street side. So it really afforded us a fair amount of growth.
And any plans to develop those 70 units today?
Yeah, so we're under construction of a 51-unit residential building that we will hold for rental units and get into that line of business again. That'll be should be done in November of 2020, assuming that leases as we fully expect it will. We will be in the approval process for that 70 units on Danforth Street.
And on this site, corner of York and High. How long did it take you to assemble all those parcels?
We bought 2 residential houses, I think, again, in about 2007 was our first purchase, and 2010, I believe, was our last purchase.
Great time to buy. That was when the market crashed.
Yeah, it was.
Vin, J.B. Brown rarely sells a property, but occasionally you do. What typically would motivate you to sell?
If we don't think the property has strategic value, or if we think the market is overpricing the asset and I have the ability to find a 1031 exchange.
So
and
somebody
that
willing to pay a
happens,
premium.
a premium, and we can defer our taxes. But otherwise, in this marketplace, it's really difficult to sell despite some aggressive pricing without a replacement, because the tax obligations for us can be substantial in some instances.
Because after you pay the tax, you take that money, you reinvest it, you can't get the kind of return that you get by just holding the asset.
Exactly.
Yeah. There are so many properties in the J.B. Brown portfolio. Let's see how well you know them. I'm going to throw out some property names or addresses and ask you to give us a brief overview and background of each.
Okay.
Now, we have not rehearsed this, right?
We have not rehearsed. This is like a game show.
This is a game show. Let's see. 40 Free Street, Portland.
40 Free Street. That is what is under construction currently. It's a 70,000 square foot building. It's in an open space of land between 48 Free Street and 26 Free Street. 6-story building, 51 apartments, 7,500 square feet of retail space, and 27 underground parking spaces.
And if I drive by there now, there's a big hole in the ground.
There is a large hole in the ground. There's a fair amount of ledge that needed to be taken out to accommodate the parking.
A little bit of blasting.
Yeah, you can't blast in Portland efficiently, but a lot of hoe ramming, yes.
Okay. And when's that going to be done?
We should be done in November.
Oh, that's quick.
Yeah.
That's quick. Another property, 102 Hutchins Drive in Portland.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We sold a couple of warehouses on Quarry Road to New England Public Warehousing, who I sold an operating company to. We used to own an operating company called Four River Warehouse and Distribution that leased a bunch of our warehouses. We sold the operating company, did a lease back to Drew Gilman and New England Public, ultimately sold them those 2 assets and purchased 102 Hutchins Drive. It's a little risky. It was a vacant building, but the pricing was great.
Now, the history on that building, as I recall, tell me if I'm wrong, but Porteous, Mitchell and Braun, a department store, which used to be in the main mall and was a Portland staple at the time, built that warehouse.
They did.
For their own use.
They built it in 1995.
And it was sold to Unum.
To Unum, and we purchased it from Unum.
Right.
And we're selling it to Maine Health.
Right. 901 Washington Avenue, Portland.
The Rainbow Mall. I got my first ski jacket there
At the Rainbow Mall?
1978. Yeah, it's a great project. When I started, Andover College was in a portion of it. Subsequently now is Spurwink. And we built a building 895 in front along
So where
Washington
Martin's
Avenue?
Point is?
Martin's Point. We built it for Martin's Point, 18,000 square foot building. And it really was the last piece to make that look more like Business Park, at least from the street, than a converted shopping mall with a big field of pavement.
Because before you got involved, it was the Rainbow Mall, which was was it an outlet center?
Yeah, it had a number of things. I mean, I grew up in Portland, so I remember there was a ski shop there. There was Martin's grocery store was there. The Department of Motor Vehicles was in there. It was an internal mall, actually.
Yeah.
But when I came on board, it had been converted to office space.
Well, it's certainly at its highest and best use now, I would say.
It's a great project.
15 Saunders Way in Westbrook.
Yeah, another good one. We purchased that in 2008, I believe. We got it off the rebound from Walmart was buying that property, I think for $7.5 million. They got a zone change. The neighbors went crazy. There was a big lawsuit. It fell apart. We ended up buying it for $3.5 million, and it has been a great asset. We took a lot of the buildings, the old sort of miscellaneous buildings down, have built a few new ones on site, and it's a great asset.
It's industrial.
Industrial and office, yeah.
Yeah. So from 7.5 to 3.5 million.
Yeah.
Kind of like a blue light special.
Yeah. You make money when you buy, Greg.
You do, hopefully. 30 Danforth Street in Portland.
Yeah, that's a building that the company actually built in 1888 and has owned it continuously since then. When I started, it had one large tenant. Well, it had a few small tenants, but one tenant that occupied a good portion of the building. They left in 2009 or 10. And we basically split the building up. And so instead of having 4 or 5 tenants in the building, I think we have 18 tenants right now, diversified our risk, higher rent. It's a great building. It's largely fully occupied.
Is that the one across from Yosako? And it's bordered by 2 streets?
Correct.
By York and Danforth?
Yeah, it looks like a Flatiron building if you're looking at it coming from the old port. Wright Ryan owns the prow of the building, and then we own the back, 77,000 square feet.
You know, in high school, I worked for Cunningham Construction, which was my uncle's company, and I poured the floor in there, at least on part of that building. So if it's a little uneven, you'll know why. 80 Exchange Street in Bangor.
80 Exchange Street, another project that I think is going to turn out well for the company. It's about 85,000 square foot office building in downtown Bangor. Bangor is starting to see what Portland has seen for the last 10 years and a fair amount of investment by the municipality and small businesses into the downtown. And so this building came available with Dead River, wanted out of the market, and we bought it at a reasonable price.
Again, the key is you make your money when you buy.
Yeah.
And the last one, the land on West Commercial Street, which we talked about that you bought from the railroad, which they bought from you years ago. You have a future development plan for that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, we teamed up with FD Stonewater, a group out of Virginia that has done a fair amount of government leases and developments across the country. And so the VA clinic, when they put out an RFP, we teamed up with FD Stonewater to give a proposal. And we ended up winning it, and we're in the approval process right now. We hope to be under construction in April or May, with occupancy in July of 2021.
And that's next to the Star Match
building, yeah.
And how many square feet will it be?
2-story, 70,000 square foot building and a parking garage of about 380.
Right. Nice development.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Then getting off of properties for a second, we've been in an economic expansion for the past 10 years or so. Some of our younger listeners have never seen a down cycle. I think you and I have been in the business long enough where we've seen 3 major downturns.
Yeah.
Can you give our listeners an example of how bad it can get? Can you think of anything?
Yeah, the banks and the lenders are the ones that really control how bad it can be. I mean, you recall in the early 90s.
Which took over Main Savings Bank.
People were calling in loans that were actually performing, but they didn't feel that they and could continue to perform under the covenants from a cash flow standpoint. But the asset values, given sales, distressed sales, made it look like they were undercapitalized. So a lot of these loans that would have been fine over time were called, and I think it just exacerbated the problems for everyone. So the lesson is really, what does your capital stack look like? And over leverage really can amplify earnings in the good times, but it can really crush you very quickly in a downturn.
Right. So the key is don't be over leveraged.
Don't be over leveraged. Yeah.
And I know with the banks, what they did in that time period is, as you said, if there was a technical default, the appraisal came in and it showed that your building wasn't worth what the appraisal was, even though it was cash flowing. That's called a technical default, and they could call the loan, which just exacerbated. It was a terrible, terrible time. Given the boom and bust cycles we've seen in the real estate market over the years, I'm sure you're often asked the question, is it different this time? So as president of the oldest real estate company in the state of Maine, and no doubt you know the answer to this question, so Vin, is it different this time? Is this economic boom we're seeing in the Portland market different than others which have come before?
It feels different. Time will tell, right? But there is a group of users, both from a residential side and from a business side. People are more mobile. People can work remotely. In Portland, it has a great quality of life. The restaurants are great, the coffee, the bakeries, the breweries, and it's really been all cobbled together. And I think the word is out, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. I mean, it's not going to be gangbusters. Everything has a cycle, but I think the underpinnings of the market are actually pretty strong.
So do you think when we have a downturn nationally, Portland should fare okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. How about on the hotel end? I mean, we see a lot of hotels going up. You own hotels. Is there a bubble in that market?
Bubble might be too strong of a word. I mean, I think that everyone will feel the pressure when you add another 300 rooms. Same thing was said when Jim Brady, us, and Tim Soley built that someone's going to get hurt. And it has been phenomenal. And so, yeah, we might have a little bit of a pullback, but you're not having a 10% pullback in this market. I mean, there's unmet demand.
Even at this point?
Yeah.
And I think as we speak, there are 3 or 4 new hotels that are planned.
Yeah.
Amazing. Looking at Portland, what do you see as Portland's greatest strengths, but also some hindrances to further growth?
Well, location is great, right? I mean, the physical beauty of the area is fantastic. The accessibility is good. So, I mean, all of that stuff is good. It is expensive to live here. I mean, you have an infrastructure that is expensive to maintain. It's old, so both the state and municipalities are going to have to tax in order to fix things. So that's a little bit of a headwind. Construction costs right now are certainly a headwind in future growth. The one savior is interest rates, which are just incredibly low. I mean, historically, and have been for a while.
Speaking of interest rates, I remember I saw you in Bard Coffee one day. This was a year or 2 ago, and we got
That
talking
could have been
about
any day.
Yeah, it could be any day. But at that particular time, I asked you. I said, what's it going to take for construction to slow down or not happen in Portland, at least for say J.B. Brown? And at the time, you said, if interest rates get to 5% or above, then that's kind of a point where the faucet gets turned off. Do you still feel that's the case? And what are the rates you're seeing now?
Yeah, so I do think, I'll give you an example. 40 Free Street. We started looking at the pro forma on that in February of last year, so February of 2019. We were running a pro forma rates at the point were 4.1%. We had a budget, pick a number, $15 million. Started to get pricing back from the contractors, ends up being $1 million more, say $16 million. We would not have moved forward at 4.1%, believe it or not, with an extra $1 million in costs. But in that intervening time until August, when we closed the loan, our rates went down. We locked in at 3.1%. So that 100 basis points really mitigated $1 million of excess costs. And so we moved forward. And I think at 5%, it would be really tough to make the numbers work on new construction.
Yeah, unless you had a big drop in construction costs.
Yeah,
Right. Vin, looking into your crystal ball, which I know you have, for the next 10 years, what do you see happening to commercial real estate here in Maine, in Portland in particular?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a fair amount of residential development continue. I think you will see some build to suit on the office side, like we've seen with Wex and with Covetras and with Sun Life. It's really tough to make numbers work on an office space right now with the added cost of parking. So you might get a tenant that will pay you $30 or $35 a foot, which is what really you have to get on a net basis to make the numbers work. But I just don't know how many companies can actually afford long-term to pay that. And so if you lose that lead tenant in, 5 or 10 years, it's going to be tough to replace those numbers, which is another reason why your capital stack has got to be not over-leveraged.
You touched on parking. There's not a day that goes by when somebody doesn't talk to me about parking in downtown Portland, how difficult it is. And I mean, how much of a hindrance is that to further growth?
For the smaller tenant, it's a problem. I mean, we've lost a couple of tenants to the suburbs that normally, in creative economy type of advertising firm types, that would prefer to be on the peninsula, but then say, at the end of the day, we'll go to, the Spahawk Mill in Yarmouth, or we'll go out to the Dana Warp Mill and pay a little bit less per square foot and not have to deal with the parking.
Yeah.
So it's a problem.
And we find parking ads anywhere from $5 to $7 a square foot onto the occupancy cost of a tenant.
Yeah.
So it's not a small price, and it's going up. As a former commercial broker and someone who deals with brokers all the time, what advice would you give brokers just getting into the business? Don't do it?
No, I think it's a great business. If you like dealing with
I do too. I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah. I would say think of the long term. Don't make decisions short term. If you have to yield on a fee or you're in a conflict with someone over something, use the yellow bean approaches that the customer's always right and it will pay dividends long term. It might feel not great at the time, but I think long term you'll have a very successful career.
So Vin, I think that's all the questions we've got for you today. I want to thank you for coming and giving us your insight into the commercial real estate market. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's great. I'm honored to be asked to do it, and I'm not sure I'm looking forward to watching myself on video, but I'm happy that you reached out, and it's been great working with the Boulos Company and with you over the years. So thank you so much.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Boulos Beat. Special thanks to Vin Veroneau for being my guest. You can learn more about Vin and JB Brown and Sons at their website, which is www.jbbrown.com. And if you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at www.boulos.com. You can find us at the Boulos Company on Facebook and LinkedIn, and at the Boulos Co. on Instagram and Twitter. And lastly, if you want to know the secret to owning real estate, it's pretty simple. Just make sure you outlive your debt.